Some bargains are struck in candlelight, others on a rain-soaked London street between two people who should have remained strangers. A dinner, a dress, a mother who smiles too knowingly, and a lie that learns, course by course, how to tell the truth. We begin this story now. The rain over London that afternoon had the particular quality of late October, not the clean, decisive downpour of summer storms, but a fine, insinuating drizzle that worked its way beneath collars and into the seams of one's gloves, with the patience of something that intended to stay. The pavements gleamed like wet slate. The lamps had been lit early, casting their wet gold across the puddles in trembling smears, and the air carried the commingled scent of roasting chestnuts from a vendor on the corner and the damp wool of 100 passing coats. Draco Malfoy was walking with the rapid, slightly off-kilter stride of a man being pursued by something only he could see. He had left the manor 3 hours ago under the pretext of an errand at Gringotts. The errand was a fiction. Gringotts had been a fiction. Everything since breakfast had been a fiction, in fact, beginning with the moment his mother had set down her teacup with that particular soft chime of porcelain meeting saucer and said, in her gentlest voice, "Darling, I've invited the Greengrasses for Sunday." The Sunday before, it had been the Selwyns. The Sunday before that, the Travers. Each visit performed with the same exquisite choreography. A daughter in pearls, a mother in indulgent retreat, Narcissa pouring tea with the focused serenity of a general arranging troops across a map. He had begun to dream of those teacups. He had begun to dream of the slow, deliberate arc of his mother's wrist as she lifted the silver pot, and to wake with his heart pounding as though he had been running. So he was running now, in his way, through a Muggle district he had selected precisely because nobody he knew would think to look for him in it. He had charmed his coat to seem unremarkable, his hair to lie flat and dark, his bearing to fall somewhere between the dozens of harried young professionals threading their way home through the wet. He was, for one blessed afternoon, no one in particular. The relief was so acute it felt almost sinful. He passed a bakery exhaling warm air through its propped open door. He passed a record shop with its painted lettering peeling at the edges. He passed, and he stopped, not all at once. The recognition came in pieces, the way a name surfaces from sleep. First, the silhouette in the doorway of a small bookshop, half turned, balancing a paper bag against her hip while she fumbled with an umbrella that refused to open. Then, the curve of the cheek. Then the brown of the hair, pulled back imperfectly, with one curl having escaped at the temple and gone dark with rain. Then her eyes lifting and finding him, and widening with the unmistakable, instantaneous comprehension of a woman who has spent half her life learning to recognize threats at 100 paces. "Malfoy." She said it flatly, not unkindly. She was past unkindness, which was perhaps worse. Just the surname, placed on the wet air between them like a coin set down on a counter. Granger. His own voice came out rougher than he had intended. He had not used it for an hour. His throat felt scoured by the cold. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The umbrella in her hand finally surrendered and bloomed open with a damp metallic ratchet, and she stepped back beneath the bookshop's striped awning, and he, without quite deciding to, followed, Two strangers in the dim glow of a muggle shopfront, a paper bag of books between them, the smell of the wet pavement rising. "You look," she said, and stopped, and then chose her words again with the careful deliberation he remembered from the Wizengamot benches 3 years ago. "You look as though you're being chased." He almost laughed. The sound that escaped him was closer to a cough. Astute as ever. "By whom?" "My mother." Her brows lifted a fraction. She did not ask the obvious question. She waited as she had waited then, in that same posture of contained, intelligent patience, and he found, to his quiet horror, that he was answering her. "Every Sunday," he said, "for the past 9 weeks. A different daughter, a different family. She has begun to schedule them, Granger. She has begun to schedule them in her morning planner between her correspondence and her appointments with the rose gardener. I came out for air. I have been walking for 3 hours. I cannot go home." He stopped. He had not meant to say any of that. He had meant to nod stiffly and walk past. He had meant to be the man he had spent 3 years rehearsing, polished, distant, finished. Instead, he was standing under a muggle awning telling Hermione Granger about his mother's planner. She was watching him with an expression he could not pass. Not pity. Pity he would have recognized. He had developed, in the years since the trials, a fine sensitivity to its precise temperature. This was something else, something closer to recognition, as though she had seen in his 3-hour walk the shape of an exhaustion she knew. "That sounds," she said carefully, "very tiring." "It is tiring. And she means well. She means marriage, Granger, which is rather a different thing from meaning well." This time, the smile that touched the corner of her mouth was real. Small, reluctant, but real. And it did something to the cold air between them that he was not prepared for. He looked at the paper bag against her hip. He looked at the rain striping the awning. He looked at the place where the escaped curl was clinging darkly to the line of her jaw. And it arrived in him whole, the way certain ideas arrived, fully formed, faintly ridiculous, undeniable. "Granger, Malfoy, I am about to ask you something monstrous." She tilted her head. She did not step back. He registered the not stepping back with a flicker of something that was not yet hope. "Go on." He drew breath. The breath did not help. He spoke anyway, in the rapid, slightly clipped cadence he had used as a boy when he was about to do something he knew he should not. "My mother is hosting a dinner this Saturday. A family dinner, which in the dialect of Malfoy Manor means a piece of choreography. There will be 3 courses, a green grass, and a quiet conversation in the drawing room afterwards, in which I am expected to express a deepening interest. If I arrive alone, the evening will proceed as designed. If I arrive with a woman of my own choosing, visibly, unmistakably with the woman beside me, the entire architecture collapses. My mother is too well bred to make a scene in front of a guest. She will smile. She will pour the wine. She will retreat and regroup and grant me perhaps a fortnight of peace before the next attempt. That fortnight, Granger, is the most precious thing I can imagine owning." She had gone very still. The umbrella tilted slowly in her hand, a fat drop of water sliding from its rim and striking the pavement between them with a small, audible tap. "You're asking me," she said slowly, "to pretend to be your girlfriend. For one dinner, 4 hours, 6 at the outside. At Malfoy Manor. At Malfoy Manor. In front of your mother. In front of my mother. She stared at him. He waited for the laugh. He waited for the cool, surgical refusal. The "don't be absurd, Malfoy," the "I think you've mistaken me for someone with time for your domestic theatre." He had earned each of them. He had earned worse. He stood under the striped awning of a Muggle bookshop in a coat he had charmed to look like nobody's coat at all, and he waited. She did not laugh. She said, "Why me?" It was the question he had not prepared for, because he had not, in the 8 seconds since the idea arrived, examined it that closely. He examined it now, under the wet October light, with her looking at him as though the answer mattered. "Because," he said, and stopped and began again. "Because nobody in my mother's circle would believe it of anyone else. Because if I arrived with a Greengrass cousin or a Selwyn's second daughter, my mother would simply rearrange the seating. Because you..." He drew breath. "Because you are the one woman in Britain whose presence at that table would render the entire production unsalvageable." She would understand instantly that the question was closed. A muscle moved in Hermione's jaw. He could not tell whether he had offended her or merely surprised her. "I see. And because," he added more quietly, "I trust you not to enjoy it." She looked at him then with something sharper than recognition. He had said the wrong thing, perhaps, or the right one. He was past the point of being able to distinguish. The drizzle had thickened. The chestnut vendor on the corner was calling out his prices in a voice gone hoarse with the cold. Somewhere, far off, a bus shouldered its way through standing water with a long hiss. "I have a foundation, Malfoy. I know you have a foundation. For werewolf rehabilitation, we are perpetually 3 months from insolvency. We employ a healer who has not been paid since August because she insists on it, and a clerk who is owed back wages I cannot meet." "Name your price." She did not blink. 2,000 galleons. He did not blink either. "Done." A pause. A small, electric pause in which the umbrella tilted further, and a second drop joined the first on the pavement. She seemed, for the first time in the conversation, slightly off her footing, as though she had named a sum designed to end the conversation, and the conversation had, perversely, refused to end. "You agreed too quickly," she said. "You named your price too quickly. Granger." He stepped, not closer exactly, but enough that the rim of her umbrella sheltered them both, and the world narrowed by a degree. Say yes, and I will draft the contract tonight. Say yes, and on Sunday morning my mother will be pouring tea for no one but herself, and you will be writing a check to your healer. Say yes." She was looking at him. She was looking at him the way she had looked at him in the courtroom 3 years ago, when he had not been able to look back, steady, weighing, with the faint vertical line between her brows that he had learned, in a fortnight of trial proceedings, meant she was deciding something she did not yet wish to decide. The paper bag shifted against her hip. The rain hissed against the awning. The fat second drop hung at the umbrella's rim, trembling, refusing to fall. She opened her mouth. She had not, in the end, said yes on the pavement. She had said, "I will write to you by Wednesday," in the clipped, formal cadence of a witch concluding a transaction she did not yet trust herself to have entered into. and she had stepped back from beneath the awning into the thinning drizzle and walked away with the paper bag of books pressed against her hip like a shield. Draco had watched her go for perhaps 12 seconds before he had remembered that he was meant to be a stranger on a muggle street, and that staring after a witch in the rain like a man bereaved was no part of the disguise. Her letter had arrived on Wednesday morning by an owl he did not recognize, on stationery so plain it bordered on austere. I accept. The funds to be deposited in escrow at Gringotts before the evening, releasable on my signature. We meet Thursday at 4 o'clock to discuss terms. The Rosewater, Bloomsbury, Muggle establishment. Do not be late. H.G. He had read it 3 times. He had folded it. He had unfolded it. He had folded it again, more carefully, along the original crease, and slid it into the inside pocket of his coat, where, throughout the rest of Wednesday and the slow grey hours of Thursday morning, it had pressed against his ribs with the small, persistent weight of something he could not quite believe was real. The Rosewater was the kind of cafe that Muggles, in their unsentimental way, called a neighbourhood spot. Narrow, low-ceilinged, with mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu, and the smell of strong coffee laid over the older, more permanent smell of wood smoke from the small iron stove in the back. There were perhaps 4 other patrons when he arrived, none of them looking up. He had charmed his coat again. He had, against every instinct cultivated in him from the age of 6, arrived 7 minutes early. She was already there. She had taken a table by the window with her back to the wall and a clear line of sight to the door, which he registered as the choice of someone who had learned, somewhere, never to sit otherwise. 2 cups of coffee were on the table. A small leather notebook lay closed beside hers, with a Muggle ballpoint pen aligned against its spine at a precise right angle. Malfoy. Granger. He removed his coat with a deliberation that gave him 3 seconds to compose his face. He sat. The chair across from her was not quite level on its legs, and rocked under him with a small wooden complaint that struck him, absurdly, as the funniest thing that had happened to him in 9 weeks. You ordered for me. I ordered black. If you take it otherwise, you may correct it. I was not prepared to spend a quarter of an hour establishing your preferences. Black is correct. Good. She opened the notebook. He watched her open the notebook. There was, he noticed, a list inside it. Written in the small, dense, slightly forward-tilted hand he remembered from the margins of every potions essay he had ever cribbed from over her shoulder in the 4th year. The list was numbered. The numbers were already at 7. He took a slow sip of the coffee. It was very hot. It was very good. He set it down. 7 items, Granger? 11. I trimmed it. Mercy. I have not yet begun. She did not look up. We will proceed in order. Interrupt only if a point is genuinely unworkable. Yes, headmistress. The pen lifted half an inch from the page. She did not look at him. The line of her shoulder, however, communicated with admirable economy that she had heard him, that she had considered several responses, and that she had selected the response of pretending he had not spoken at all. He found, to his deepening alarm, that this entertained him. Item 1, she said. Duration of our supposed acquaintance. 3 months. 4. 3. Long enough to be serious. Short enough that my mother cannot demand to know why she has not been informed. A pause. The pen pen made a small, decisive mark. 3. Item 2. The nature of our introduction. Ministry corridor, late summer. We were both waiting for the lift to the atrium, and you were carrying too many files. That is very specific. It is also true. It happened in August. You did not notice me. She did, at this, look up. The fluorescent light of the cafe was unkind to nobody, which meant it was unkind to no one in particular, and her eyes in it were a darker brown than he remembered from the rain, flecked near the pupil with a thread of warmer gold he had no business cataloguing. I noticed you. You did not greet me. I noticed you, Malfoy. I chose not to greet you. There is a difference. He inclined his head. He took another sip of coffee. The chair under him rocked again, and he resettled his weight, and he wondered with a small, distant alarm whether this was going to be very much harder than he had imagined, or very much easier. Item 3, she said. Forms of address. In public, between ourselves, before your mother. Christian names. Anything else will read as theatre. In private. He hesitated. The hesitation was a half-second too long, and he watched her register it, and he watched her decide, with the same small, precise motion of the pen, not to remark upon it. Surnames are fine in private, he said. We need not perform for an empty room. Agreed. Item 4. Physical contact. The pen stilled. So did the room, although the room had been still already, and so the stilling was only a thing that happened inside him. He set the cup down with great care. He did not look at her hands on the table. He did not look at the small, soft place at the inside of her wrist, where the sleeve of her jumper had ridden up half an inch over the bone. Minimal, he said. Credible. My mother is observant. The absence of touch will read as falsehood as quickly as its excess. A hand at your back during introductions. The pulling out of your chair. The taking of your coat. If we are seated near one another, which we will be, my hand may rest on the back of your chair at some point during the second course. Nothing further. Nothing without warning. Nothing without warning. You have my word. She wrote nothing without warning in the notebook. She underlined it. She did not look up. Item 5, she said, and her voice had taken on a quality he had not heard in it before. Not unsteadiness exactly, but a faint additional carefulness, as though she were holding something delicate in the hand that was not writing. Endearments. Granger. It is a question that must be answered, Malfoy. If your mother addresses me by my Christian name, and you continue to address me by my surname, the falsehood is finished before the soup is cleared. I am aware. So. He drew breath. He looked at the chalkboard menu over her shoulder. He looked at the small iron stove. He looked, eventually, because there was nowhere else honest to look at her. Hermione, then, in her hearing. Granger, between ourselves, when we are alone. She wrote it down. Hermione, in her hearing. Granger, when alone. The pen moved. The pen stopped. And from me, she said. He had not, he realized, considered this side of the equation at all. He had assumed, in some unexamined recess, that she would call him by whatever she chose, and that whatever she chose would be tolerable, because he had been called worse by better. He examined the assumption now. He found it lacking. Draco, he said after a moment, if you can bring yourself to it. I can bring myself to it. You sound very certain. I have done harder things, Malfoy. He laughed. He did not mean to. The sound surprised them both. Short, dry, more breath than voice. And he saw, for the briefest possible interval, the corner of her mouth move in answer before she mastered it. Item 6, she said, looking down at the notebook with what he was beginning to understand was deliberate evasion. Subjects to be avoided in conversation. The war, the war, the trials, my father. A pause. The pen paused with it. Your father, she said more quietly. Yes. And anything, he added after a moment, regarding the events at the manor in the spring of '98. He did not say what happened to you in our drawing room. He did not have to. He saw her register it, the small involuntary lift of her chin, the swift downward flick of her lashes, the way her thumb pressed for a half-second against the side of the pen as though to steady it. She did not look up. She wrote spring 1998 in the notebook. She drew a line through it. She wrote it again above the line. Agreed, she said. Granger. It will not arise, Malfoy. Your mother is not vulgar. She will not raise it. I will not raise it. We will discuss politics and books and the Rose Garden, which I understand is famous, and we will be perfectly civilized about all of it. You have read about the Rose Garden. I have done research. Of course you have. He could not entirely keep the warmth out of his voice. He heard it leave him. He heard her hear it. The pen moved a quarter of an inch and was set down beside the notebook with the same precise right angle as before. And she lifted her cup and she drank. And the small movement of her throat as she swallowed was, he discovered, a thing he had no business cataloguing either. Item 7, she said. Item 7. Why are you doing this, Malfoy? He had been ready for items 8 through 11. He had not been ready for item 7 returned to him in this form, in this cafe, over the rim of a coffee cup that was not quite steady in her hand. He took, deliberately, a breath. He set his own cup down. I told you, on the street, my mother. You told me what you want to prevent. You did not tell me what you want. The question hung. The chalkboard menu hung. The smell of the wood smoke from the iron stove curled, faintly, around them both. And the cafe behind her was busier now. A man at the counter ordering in a low voice, the hiss of the espresso machine, the small bright tinkle of a spoon against a saucer somewhere to the left, and none of it reached the table. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He opened it again. Peace, he said finally, and his voice came out lower than he had intended, and a great deal more honest. I want a fortnight of peace, Granger. I have not had one in 3 years. She did not write it down. She did not look away. The pen lay between them on the open notebook like a small dark line drawn between one country and another, and for the length of one breath, and then a second, neither of them moved to cross it. Then the door of the cafe opened with a brisk, wet jingle of its bell, and a muggle woman in a yellow mackintosh came in calling for her companion in a voice too loud for the room, and the small, fragile thing on the table broke gently, and Hermione looked down at the notebook again. Item 8, she said. Her voice had gone very even. The matter of what I am to wear. The box arrived on Saturday morning at precisely 11 o'clock. Hermione had been at her kitchen table since 7, working her way through the Foundation's quarterly accounts in a dressing gown that had once belonged to her mother, and a pair of spectacles she only wore when no one was present to see her wearing them. The flat above the chemist's in Bloomsbury was small and warm, and smelled faintly of the bergamot tea she had drunk too much of, and of the lemon polish she had applied 2 days ago to the small writing desk by the window in what she had not then admitted to herself was a form of preparation. The accounts were not improving. The accounts had not, in fact, improved in 14 months. She had drawn a small, careful line under the figure for August and was beginning the figure for September when the knock came. It was not an owl. It was a delivery, a muggle delivery by the look of it, although the boy at the door had the slightly glazed expression of a person who had been confounded just enough to forget the address by the time he reached the pavement. He handed her a long, flat box of charcoal-coloured card, tied with a ribbon of dark green silk, so fine it ran through her fingers like water, and he was gone down the stairs before she had thought to ask his name. She carried the box to the kitchen table. She set it down beside the Foundation's accounts. She stood looking at it for the better part of a minute. There was a card slipped beneath the ribbon. She drew it out. The hand on it was one she had not seen in 3 years, and yet she recognized it instantly. The sharp downstroke on the letter G, the slight backward lean of the R, the discipline of a script taught by tutors and never permitted to soften. Granger. Wear what you like. I send this only because I should be a poor escort indeed if I delivered you to my mother's drawing room without the option. Return it on Monday or burn it. The choice is yours. D. She read the note twice. She set it down. She untied the ribbon. Inside the box, folded between 2 leaves of pale tissue, was a dress. It was not, in the first instant, what she would have expected. There was nothing ostentatious about it, no embellishment, no embroidery, no glimmer of charmed thread. It was a column of silk in a green so dark it read almost as black until the light moved across it, at which point a deep, alive emerald rose up from the weave with the slow shimmer of water in a forest pool. Long sleeves. A neckline cut just precisely enough to be modest and just precisely enough to be not. A waist that would, she could already see without lifting it from the box, sit where her waist actually sat, rather than where the magazines had decided waists ought to. She did not, for a long moment, touch it. She thought with a clarity that was not at all comfortable. He looked at me long enough to know my measurements. She thought. He looked at me long enough to know what colour. She thought more quietly, and only once, before she put the thought firmly away. Nobody has looked at me long enough to know either of those things in nearly 2 years. She lifted the dress. The silk was cool and heavy and slid over her wrist with a faint, dry whisper. And she could feel, even through the tissue, the precise small weight of a garment that had been made. Not bought, not selected from a rack, but made. By hands that had been paid a great deal to know what they were doing. There was no label. There was no need for a label. The dress announced itself. She laid it across the back of the kitchen chair. She returned to the Foundation's accounts. She wrote in the figure for September. The figure was wrong. She crossed it out and wrote it in again. It was wrong a second time. She set down the pen. She looked at the dress. The dress looked back. She put her face in her hands and laughed, a small, helpless, slightly mortified laugh, into the warm, dim kitchen with the rain beginning again at the window. 2,000 galleons, she said aloud, to no one. 2,000 galleons, Hermione Jean. You are a professional." The laugh subsided. She wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand. She picked up the pen. She did not, however, return the dress to the box. He arrived at 6:30. She had been ready since 6. She had been ready, more truthfully, since 5:30, at which point she had stood in front of the small mirror on the back of her wardrobe door and looked at herself in the green silk for a length of time she did not intend to confess to anyone, ever. She had pinned her hair up in the loose, slightly imperfect arrangement she had practiced twice in the preceding fortnight. She had fastened at her throat the small gold pendant her grandmother had left her, on the grounds that she required at least one item of armor the Malfoys had not selected. She had put on the shoes. She had taken them off. She had put them on again. The knock came. She crossed to the door. She drew breath. She drew a second breath. She opened it. Draco was standing on the landing in a long, dark coat, with the rain still beading on his shoulders, and a small white flower. A winter rose, she realized, hothouse grown, the kind that did not exist in any London florist at this season, except at the specific request of someone who could afford the request, held loosely between 2 fingers of his left hand. He did not, in the first instant, speak. His mouth opened, his mouth closed. He looked at her, and the look was not a look she had been prepared for. It had nothing in it of the cool appraisal she remembered from school, nothing of the careful, finished neutrality he had worn at the Wizengamot, nothing of the wry irony he had carried into the cafe on Thursday, like a small portable shield. The look was the look of a man who had rehearsed an opening sentence and had, in the space of one breath, forgotten what the sentence was supposed to be. "Granger," he said eventually. "Malfoy. You." He stopped. He started again. "The dress fits. It fits. I see. You see." There was a small silence. He glanced down at the winter rose. He glanced back up. A muscle moved at the corner of his jaw, a small, involuntary thing, gone almost before she had registered it. And he extended the flower toward her with the faintly stiff formality of a man who had not, perhaps, given a woman a flower without an ulterior strategy in some considerable time. "It is not," he said, "part of the choreography. You need not wear it. I only thought it is beautiful. It is for your hair, if you wish, or your hand, or the bin in your kitchen. I am not particular." She took the flower. Her fingers grazed his. Only the smallest possible brush, glove against bare skin, the kind of contact that ought not to have registered at all, and registered. She stepped back into the flat to find a pin for it. He did not follow her in. He stood with old-fashioned propriety in the doorway, with the rain still glittering on the shoulders of his coat. And she was conscious, sharply, irritably, gratefully, of the small distance he had left between his body and her threshold. When she returned with the rose pinned, after some negotiation, at the place where the loose knot of her hair met the line of her neck, he looked at her again, and again the look was not the look she had armed herself against. "We should go," he said. "We should. Granger. Malfoy. Thank you." She had not been prepared for that either. She inclined her head, a small, almost formal gesture, borrowed from somewhere outside herself, and she stepped out onto the landing, and she pulled the door of her flat closed behind her with a small, precise click. He offered his arm. She looked at it for a moment. She had not, in the course of the negotiations at the Rosewater, accounted for the offered arm, for the small civil weight of a wool sleeve against her gloved hand, for the warmth of a body that would, for the next 4 hours, be cast as the body of a man who loved her. She placed her hand on his forearm. The forearm was steady. So, with effort, was she. They went down the stairs together. The chemist's below was dark. The street outside lay shining and empty, with the rain falling in slow, almost decorative drifts through the lamplight. And at the curb, a low black carriage waited. Wheels, horses, the lot, of the kind that had not been seen on a London street outside of a film set in 80 years, and that no muggle passer-by, by virtue of the small, competent charm work around it, would consciously register at all. He handed her in. She gathered the green silk against her knee with one hand and stepped up, and the carriage took her weight with a small, considered shift of its springs, and he climbed in after her and pulled the door to, and the latch fell with a soft, final click. They sat. The carriage moved. For some time, neither of them spoke. The lamps slid past in soft yellow squares across the inside of the carriage, lighting first her hands, and then his, and then her face, and then his, and then nothing for the length of a long, dark stretch of road where the trees had grown over the lane, and the rain made a small, steady percussion on the roof. "You are very quiet," she said at last. "I am thinking." "Of what?" He did not answer at once. The carriage swayed gently around a turn. A line of light slid across his cheekbone and was gone. "Of what I am about to do to you," he said eventually, "by taking you through that door. I am not afraid of your mother, Malfoy. I know. Then, I am not entirely certain," he said, "that I am not." She looked at him. He was not, she realized, performing, not the languid drawl of school, not the careful courtroom evenness, not even the wry economy of Thursday afternoon. He was sitting opposite her in the dim, swaying box of the carriage, with his hands loose on his knees, and his face turned toward the window, and the small, candid line of his profile against the passing lamplight. And he had told her the truth. She did not answer him. The carriage rounded another turn. The trees opened. Far ahead, at the end of a long, pale drive, a great house lifted out of the dark, with all its windows lit, and the rain coming down before it in long, bright threads. He drew breath. He turned to her. "Granger, whatever happens in the next 4 hours, I will be in the room with you." He said it without looking quite at her. The carriage was slowing. The wheels had found the change from gravel to the smoother stone of the forecourt, and the rhythm of the rain on the roof had thinned, because the great house had begun to gather them under the long shelter of its portico. A footman in dark livery was already moving down the steps with the measured, unhurried gait of a servant who had been trained never to seem to be hurrying. "I know," she said. "I do not mean only physically present. I know what you mean, Malfoy." He looked at her then. The lamplight from the portico had begun to slide through the carriage window, and it caught, for one slow moment, the small, pale square of his face against the dark velvet of the seat, and the line of his throat above his collar, and the place at his temple where the hair, despite a morning's discipline, had begun to fall forward in the damp. "Draco," she said quietly. "From here, Draco." He drew breath. "Hermione." The door of the carriage opened. The footman, eyes lowered, offered a gloved hand. The night air came in cold and clean and smelling of wet box hedge, and beyond the footman's shoulder, the open doors of Malfoy Manor poured out a long warm rectangle of golden light onto the wet stone, and standing at the top of those steps, in a gown the colour of poured pewter, with her hands folded at her waist, and her face composed into the particular quiet smile she reserved for those occasions on which she had been very recently surprised and intended to permit no one to know it, was Narcissa Malfoy. Hermione placed her hand in the footman's. She stepped down. The green silk fell about her ankles with a small obedient sigh. Draco came down beside her, and his hand, without warning, exactly as he had promised it would not be, and yet somehow not in violation of the promise at all, found the small of her back. The contact was light. It was also unmistakable. It said, to anyone watching from a lit doorway 20 feet above them, "This woman is with me." They climbed the steps together. "Mother," he said. "Darling." Narcissa's eyes moved from her son to the witch beside her son and rested there and did not waver. The smile did not waver either. If there was a tightening at the corners of it, it was the tightening of a woman who had spent 35 years training her face never to tighten visibly, and the result was simply that the smile became infinitesimally more luminous. "Miss Granger," she said, "what an unexpected pleasure." "Mrs. Malfoy." Hermione inclined her head exactly as low as protocol required, and not a degree lower. "Thank you for having me." "My son has been," Narcissa said gently, rather more reserved than usual on the subject of his recent acquaintances. "I had begun to suspect a reason. I am charmed to find I was correct." The line was perfect. The line was beautifully constructed. The line said, "I have known you were lying to me for some weeks, my darling, and I am about to spend 4 hours pretending I did not, with an economy and a grace that Hermione, who had spent the better part of a decade studying language as a weapon, recognized at once as the work of an artist. Mother, come in, come in. You will both catch your death. The green grasses are already in the drawing room. Hermione did not let her step falter. She did not let her smile shift. She did not look at Draco, although she felt his hand still resting at her back, and she felt through the warm wool of his coat sleeve a moment later when he took her wrist to thread her arm through his again. A tremor he was managing with the discipline of a man holding a wand steady in a duel. "The green grasses," he said very evenly. "How charming. Daphne and her mother. I thought it might be pleasant for Miss Granger to have another young woman near her at table. Lady Greengrass is a particular old friend of mine. You will adore her, my dear." "I am sure I shall." Narcissa's eyes glittered briefly with the controlled appreciation of one duelist acknowledging a clean parry from another, and she turned and led the way down the long marble corridor with the easy authority of a woman who had walked this corridor more often than she had walked any street. Hermione did not look at the floor. She did not, specifically, look at the place in the entrance hall where the floor opened into the dark, polished length that led, on the left, beneath a wide marble arch, into a room she had not seen since the spring of 1998, and which she had spent the better part of 3 years training herself not to see again, even in dreams. She did not look at it. She kept her chin level She kept her gaze on the soft pewter back of Narcissa Malfoy's gown and the small, steady, pearl-set comb at the nape of Narcissa Malfoy's neck, and she walked. Draco's hand tightened, briefly, on her wrist. It was the smallest possible pressure. It was over before she had registered it. She understood, with a clarity that arrived too late to be useful, that he had not been able to help himself, that he had been watching, in his peripheral vision, for the precise instant at which she would, or would not, glance to the left, and that the pressure of his fingers had been an involuntary acknowledgement of the fact that she had not. She did not look at him either, but she let her hand turn fractionally beneath his, until the inside of her wrist lay against the inside of his palm, rather than the back of it, and she let her thumb rest for one breath against the side of his hand, and she walked on. The drawing room was warm. The drawing room smelled of wood smoke and old roses, and the very faint, very expensive perfume of a hostess who had been dressed for an hour. A fire was burning low and decorative in a marble hearth large enough to roast an ox. 2 women were already seated on a long sofa, upholstered in a watered silk the colour of pale champagne. An older woman with a long, elegant neck and pale gold hair pinned up in the older style, and a younger one, slim, very fair, in a gown of soft dove grey, whose eyes lifted at the opening of the door with the bright, prepared expression of a woman who had been told what to expect this evening, and who registered in the space of half a second that she had been told nothing of the kind. The bright expression did not waver. It was, Hermione noticed with a small flicker of fellow feeling, the work of a creature trained in the same school as Narcissa Malfoy. "Daphne," Draco said. "Lady Greengrass." "Draco, darling." Lady Greengrass extended a hand. He took it. He brushed his lips with a precise breath of distance across the air above her knuckles. "And may I present," he said, "Miss Hermione Granger." The smallest pause. The smallest, exquisitely civilized pause of the kind that exists in drawing rooms and at funerals and in the chamber of the Wizengamot in the half-second before a verdict. "Miss Granger," said Lady Greengrass, recovering with the trained warmth of 40 years on the social circuit. "How lovely." Lady Greengrass. "Daphne, you and Miss Granger were at school together, I believe." "We were." Daphne's smile was a small thing, measured, faintly rueful, not entirely unkind. Although our paths did not often cross, Miss Granger was always very busy. I was. "You are looking very well." "Thank you. So are you." It was, Hermione thought distantly, almost funny. They were 3 women in a drawing room, exchanging the formulae of women in drawing rooms. And not one of them was unaware that the choreography for the evening had been rewritten between the soup and the fish, and not one of them was going to be the first to say so. Narcissa rang a small silver bell. "Shall we go through?" The dining room had been laid for 5. A great mahogany table polished to a depth one could have drowned in. Candles, real candles, of beeswax, with the soft animal smell that only beeswax has, set in low silver branches down the centre. A linen runner the colour of clotted cream. 5 place settings in the old Malfoy pattern, with a small green serpent worked in glaze around the rim of each plate. Hermione registered the serpents, and registered the small effort it had cost her to register them without flinching, and registered, a half-second later, that Draco had registered both. Narcissa took the head of the table. Lady Greengrass was placed at her right. Daphne, with a faint amusement that Hermione was beginning to find she rather liked, took the seat beside her mother. That left 2 seats together on Narcissa's left. "Draco, Miss Granger, do sit." He pulled out her chair. He did it in the practiced, slightly absent manner of a man who had done it for women all his life. And yet she felt the small additional steadiness of his hand on the chair back as she sat, and she understood that he was concentrating on the simple act of pulling out a chair with the focus of a man diffusing a curse. She sat. She arranged the silk of her skirt against her knee. She lifted her eyes to Narcissa Malfoy, and she smiled. Not the polite social smile she had used in the hall, but the smile she used at the ministry when she had taken the measure of an opponent and decided that the conversation could, in fact, be enjoyable. "Mrs. Malfoy," she said, "your roses are famous, I understand." "Are they really, Miss Granger?" "I have done some reading." A pause. A very small pause, into which Lady Greengrass lifted her wine, and Daphne's eyelashes flickered downward with the swift discretion of a woman who has just decided to spend the entire evening watching, and Narcissa Malfoy's mouth, at the corner only, at the very corner only, moved. "How clever of you, my dear. I confess to a fondness for research. I had heard." The footman began to carry in the first course, a clear consommé, faintly steaming, in cups of pale Sèvres porcelain, so thin one could see the candlelight through them when they were lifted. A second footman moved down the line of glasses with a decanter, pouring a wine the colour of pale straw with the slow professional wrist of a man who had been pouring wine in this room for 30 years. Draco lifted his glass. His hand, Hermione saw, only because she had begun, in spite of every intention to watch for it, was not entirely steady. Hers was. She lifted hers too. She turned, deliberately in her chair, until her shoulder brushed the wool of his sleeve. She did not look at him. She looked at his mother. "To the rose garden, Mrs. Malfoy." A beat. Narcissa Malfoy lifted her own glass with a small, slow, deeply considered smile. "To the rose garden, Miss Granger." Their glasses met across the candles with a small, high, clear note of crystal answering crystal, and Hermione felt, against her shoulder, the breath go slowly out of Draco Malfoy. The consommé gave way to a fish in pale butter, and the fish to a roast of lamb, laid on a bed of something dark and fragrant that Hermione, after the second mouthful, identified as juniper. The wine changed. The candles burned down by 1/4 of an inch. The conversation, which had begun in the cautious, glancing manner of horses being introduced across a fence, settled by degrees into a rhythm. Hermione spoke of policy reform. She spoke of it with the easy specificity of a woman who had drafted, in her own hand, 3 separate amendments to the Werewolf Registration Act. She spoke of it without raising her voice, without crowding the table, with the small civilized pauses that permitted Lady Greengrass to interject. And Lady Greengrass, to her credit, did interject, and the interjections were not unintelligent. The older woman had read, it transpired, the proposed revisions to the Inheritance Act of 1923. She had opinions about them. The opinions were conservative, but they were not idle. "You disagree with the 3rd clause, Lady Greengrass." "I find it overreaching, Miss Granger." "I find it underreaching, which I suppose places us at opposite poles. Although Hermione lifted her glass a quarter of an inch, I am told by Mr. Macmillan at the department that the third clause was, in any event, drafted by a committee, and that any committee of more than 4 people will produce a document that overreaches in some places and underreaches in others simultaneously. Perhaps that is what we are both responding to. A small, considered silence. Lady Greengrass, who had been prepared to find the conversation tedious in the manner of conversations conducted by clever Muggle-born girls who had been clever Muggle-born girls in school, set down her wine with an expression that was not quite a smile. "That is a generous concession, Miss Granger." "It is a literal one. I have read the committee notes." "You have read the committee notes." "I keep them in my office. They are usually more instructive than the legislation." A laugh, short, surprised, genuine, escaped Lady Greengrass before she could prevent it. Daphne's eyes, lowered above her plate, lifted for the briefest instant and met Hermione's across the candles, and there was in them, unmistakably, the small bright glint of a woman who has found the evening considerably more entertaining than she had been prepared for. Hermione did not look at Narcissa. She did not have to. She felt, with the small, clear sensitivity she developed at any table where she was being measured, the precise quality of Narcissa Malfoy's attention against the side of her face. Not hostile, not approving, not yet anything one might pin down, but watchful with the watchfulness of a woman re-evaluating a hand of cards mid-game. Beside her, Draco was very still. He had eaten, he had drunk. He had, when required, contributed remarks of the kind that one contributed at one's mother's dining table, and the remarks had been correctly pitched and correctly timed, and entirely without distinction. He was, she understood, attempting to take up as little of the conversation as he possibly could, on the not unreasonable theory that the less he said, the less she would have to support. It had not occurred to him, evidently, that she did not require supporting. She let her hand rest, between the lamb and the salad, on the linen of the table near his. Not touching, near. She watched his eyes flick down to it, the small involuntary flick gone in the space of half a breath, and she watched the line of his shoulder, which had been held with the discipline of a man waiting for an explosion, give way by the smallest possible degree. Lady Greengrass began to speak of her own daughters. Daphne, with the wry forbearance of a witch who had heard the speech before, contributed the appropriate filial murmurs at the appropriate intervals. Narcissa lifted her wine and let her mother friend speak. Under the table, Draco's knee came very briefly against the side of Hermione's. It was not a flirtation. It was not even strictly a decision. He had shifted in his chair, and his knee had moved, and it had touched hers through the green silk and the wool of his trousers, and he had not, for one breath and then a second, moved it away. She did not move hers either. The lamb was cleared. The salad came in. A small, bright, perfectly composed thing of pale leaves and shavings of something the colour of ivory, and a vinegar so pale it sang on a tongue. The conversation turned, with the inevitable gravity of all conversations at Malfoy tables, to the rose garden. "My mother," Draco said, speaking for the first time in 20 minutes with anything approaching warmth, "is too modest about it. There are varieties in the South Walk that exist nowhere else in Britain. You exaggerate, darling. I do not. The white grandiflora at the southwest corner was bred by my great-grandmother in 1887. There are 3 of them in the world. 2 are in this garden. The 3rd is in a private collection in Vienna and may be presumed not to count. My son, Narcissa said to the table at large, has loved that garden since he was 4 years old. He used to hide in it. I would find him asleep under the trellis. A small, private silence. Hermione turned her head. She looked at him. He had not, she realized, expected his mother to say that. The line of his jaw had set in the small, involuntary way that meant a memory had arrived without permission. And she watched, with a quiet that was not theatre, the muscle move once at his temple before he mastered it. I should very much like to see it, she said. The rose garden? The white grandiflora. Narcissa's eyes lifted. The eyes were unreadable. The smile, the small, mysterious smile that Hermione had been watching for over the course of 3 courses, moved by perhaps 1/4 of a degree into something warmer. Of course, my dear, after dinner, Draco shall take you. In the rain, mother. There is a covered walk along the south wall. You know the one. Your grandfather had it built precisely for inclement evenings. I should not dream of sending Miss Granger out into the rain proper. I am not entirely a monster, darling. No, mother. Not entirely. The pudding was a small, dark thing in a wine reduction. The wine was poured a 4th time into a smaller glass, sweeter. Lady Greengrass spoke of Vienna. Hermione had not been, and listened with the genuine attention of a witch who had spent the past 3 years reading, and not properly travelling. Daphne, who had been twice, contributed corrections. Narcissa, who had been a dozen times, contributed nothing. She had begun, by the 4th glass, to watch the table with the quiet of a hostess satisfied that the evening was now running itself. And the watching, Hermione observed, rested most often, and longest not on her, and not on Lady Greengrass, but on her son. Draco was speaking more. He had begun, somewhere around the salad, to speak more. He had laughed once, briefly, at a remark of Daphne's, a real laugh, low, brief, gone almost before it had arrived. And he had, twice, leaned toward Hermione to make a small private observation in an undertone. And the second time he had done it, the inside of his wrist had grazed the inside of hers along the linen of the tablecloth, and neither of them had moved their hands. She had not. She realized somewhere between the wine reduction and the coffee, been performing for some time. She did not know exactly when she had stopped. It had not been a single moment. It had been a slow easing, course by course, of the small bright vigilance with which she had crossed the threshold of the manor, the disciplined awareness of every pause, every glance, every micro-shift of posture, into something quieter and a great deal more dangerous. The dangerous thing was that she was enjoying herself. The dangerous thing was that she had liked the consommé. The dangerous thing was that she liked Daphne Greengrass, who was clever and weary and faintly funny in a way Hermione had not been permitted to discover at 16. The dangerous thing was that she liked, against every defence she had built, the small, careful attention of Narcissa Malfoy's questions. And how does the Foundation manage its quarterly funding, my dear? I have always found charitable structures fascinating, which were not, in any conceivable sense, idle. The dangerous thing, above all, was that she liked the man beside her, not the boy she remembered, the man. The man who pulled out chairs as though concentrating on a curse, who left exactly the right distance between his body and a doorway, who had given her a winter rose with a sentence that excused her from accepting it, who had reached his hand once toward the salt cellar across her plate and arrested the motion at the last instant with the small mortified courtesy of a man who had not, in some weeks, had occasion to remember that one did not reach across the body of a woman one had only just begun to consider. Coffee came. Narcissa lifted her cup. "Draco, take Miss Granger to see the white grandiflora. Lady Greengrass and I have a great deal of gossip to exchange about the continent, and we shall be unbearable for the next hour." Lady Greengrass laughed. Daphne, with the small, genuine grace that Hermione was learning to appreciate, did not look up. Draco stood. He drew back Hermione's chair. He offered his hand. She took it. The grasp was, for the first time in the evening, bare, palm to palm, no glove between them, and the contact was startling in a way she had not anticipated, and the heat of it ran the length of her forearm and into the hollow above her elbow before she had taken half a step from the table. "Mother, darling, we shan't be long. Take as long as you need." The covered walk along the south wall was narrow. It was lit by lamps in iron brackets set at intervals into the stone, and the rain, which had thickened again in the hour since they had crossed the forecourt, came down beyond it in a fine grey curtain that threw the lamps back at themselves in long, wet, trembling lines along the flagstones. The smell was of wet box and old stone, and, underneath, the faint, sweet ghost of roses that were not, this late in October, yet finished. He did not let go of her hand. She did not let go of his. They walked. The flagstones were uneven. Once she misjudged a step, and his fingers tightened around hers. And once a gust of wet wind came through the open colonnade and caught at the silk of her skirt and at the loose curl at her temple, and the curl came down across her cheek, and she felt his free hand lift halfway between them as though to put the curl back, and she felt him register the lift, and she felt him return the hand to his side. They reached the corner. The white grandiflora was there, 3 blooms only, late, very pale in the lamplight, with the wet beading on their petals like small bright pearls. "Granger, Draco." He drew breath. She turned to face him. The lamp above them lit one side of his face and left the other in shadow, and the line of his mouth, she saw, was not steady. "You are not pretending," he said. It was not a question. It was not quite an accusation either. She opened her mouth to answer, and then, from the end of the colonnade, soft, perfectly timed, perfectly civilized, came the sound of a single pair of footsteps. Narcissa. She came down the colonnade with the unhurried, absorbed step of a woman who had been walking her own gardens for 30 years and had no particular need to look where her feet were going. A pale cashmere wrap had been laid over her shoulders against the damp. The lamps lit her, one after another, in soft, careful intervals, and her hands were folded loosely at her waist, and her face wore the small, considered smile of a hostess who had decided, somewhere between the coffee and the second glass of Madeira, that her presence elsewhere was no longer essential to the smooth running of the evening. Hermione did not immediately withdraw her hand. She did not immediately do anything at all. The grasp between her palm and Draco's had become, in the slow minute before the footsteps, a thing held without conscious effort. The way one holds a cup that has cooled, the way one holds a book one has stopped reading. She had ceased, several minutes ago, to think of it as a held hand, and had begun to think of it as a hand. Simply, that was where it was. It took her perhaps a second and a half to remember that there were rules about such things, and that a witch one had been raised to address as Mrs. Malfoy did not, on the whole, require an additional minute to interpret what she was looking at. Draco let go first. It was not abrupt. He let go with the slow, slightly distracted care of a man setting down a glass he had forgotten he was holding, and he stepped a quarter of a pace away from her, and his shoulders settled into the discipline of an upbringing. He had not, until that moment, remembered he possessed. "Mother, darling, forgive me. Lady Greengrass has retired to the morning room with a headache, and I find myself in want of a turn before bed. The garden after rain is the best thing in the world, I have always thought. Miss Granger, you have not finished your tour. May I impose upon you to permit me to walk the South Walk with you both? I shall be a quiet companion." Mrs. Malfoy, of course. Such a polite girl. The smile was the same smile. The smile had not deepened, had not narrowed, had not in any visible way altered. And yet Hermione, who had spent 4 hours studying the small mathematics of Narcissa Malfoy's face, registered with the small, clean precision of a witch who had passed her arithmancy NEWT with a perfect score, that the smile had moved. Something behind it had moved. The smile itself had not changed at all, and that was the point. They walked. Narcissa kept to Hermione's other side with the quiet authority of a chaperone whose chaperonage was so absolute it required no acknowledgement. The three of them moved down the colonnade past the white grandiflora and past a second arch through which a small sunken garden lay full of black water and floating leaves, and past a low marble bench on which someone, a gardener perhaps, or a long-ago child, had left a small terracotta pot of late herbs to weather through the autumn. Narcissa spoke. She spoke of her great-grandmother who had bred the grandiflora. She spoke of a winter in 1923 when the south wall had frozen and the entire rose collection had nearly been lost. She spoke of her son at 4 years old, asleep under the trellis with a bee on his cuff, refusing to be woken. Draco, on Hermione's left, walked in silence. He did not look at his mother. He did not look at Hermione either. He looked with the fixed attention of a man taking instruction from his own footwear at the flagstones. "You will think me sentimental, Miss Granger." "I do not, Mrs. Malfoy." "You are kind." "I am attentive. There is a difference." Narcissa's eyes flickered. Once, sideways, the smallest movement of the head, and the smile at last did something. It did not deepen. It did not narrow. It softened. It softened as the smile of a portraitist softens when she has found in the sitter the precise small thing she had been waiting for the sitter to reveal. Yes, Narcissa said, very quietly. "I see that there is." They reached the end of the south walk. A small door of weathered oak opened from the colonnade back into the body of the house. Narcissa laid her hand on the latch. She turned. She looked at them, both of them in the same long, even glance. And she said, in a voice pitched only just above the soft hiss of the rain in the garden behind them, "My dear, the hour is late, and I have kept you a very long time. Draco, see Miss Granger home. Do not, on my account, hurry. I shall sit with Lady Greengrass until her headache lifts, and then I shall go to bed. You need not return tonight if it is inconvenient. Mother. Darling, good night." She did not, before she went in, look at her son again. She looked, with one last small enigmatic adjustment of the smile, at Hermione. "Miss Granger, it has been," she said, "a great pleasure." And the oak door closed behind her with a soft, well-oiled click. They did not speak for the full length of the south walk back to the forecourt. The rain had thinned to a fine drift again. The carriage, drawn up under the portico, waited with the patient stillness of an object that did not feel the cold. The footman handed Hermione in. Draco came in after her. The door closed. The wheels turned. The great house with all its lit windows slid backward into the dark and was gone, and the trees closed over the lane. For some time the only sound was the wheels. "Granger, don't. Don't, Draco. Not yet. Let me have the carriage. Let me have the wheels. Let me have 10 minutes of not knowing what just happened in there before you decide what we ought to do about it." He did not speak again. He had been sitting opposite her on the seat where he had sat on the way out. He did not move to her side. He did not put his hand toward her across the dim, swaying box of the carriage. He turned his face to the window, and he watched the dark trees pass, and the lamplight, when they came under one, lit the small, clean line of his throat above his collar, and the place where the hair had fallen forward at his temple, and the fact, which she had not, before this evening, had occasion to know about him, that his eyelashes, when he closed his eyes against a passing brightness, were very dark and very long for a man of his colouring. She closed her own eyes. She did not let herself think of the white grandiflora, or of the precise warmth of the palm she had been holding when his mother had come down the colonnade, or of the small particular weight of the words, "You are not pretending," sitting between them, undelivered, on the seat between his knee and hers. She thought, instead, of 2,000 galleons. She thought of the foundation. She thought of the healer who had not been paid since August. She thought of the small, careful figure for September in her account book, and the smaller figure for October, and the still smaller figure for November, which she had not yet had the heart to enter. She thought of the cheque she would write on Monday morning to a woman who would press her hand and refuse again to take it, and whose hand she would close around the cheque anyway. She thought of how it ought to feel, clean, businesslike, the conclusion of a transaction, and it did not feel like that at all. It felt like something else. It felt like a thing she had no name for, and that her not having a name for it was, somehow, the worst part. The carriage stopped. She opened her eyes. The street outside her flat was empty. The chemist's below was dark. The lamps were lit. The rain had stopped, although the pavement still gleamed, and a single pale leaf had blown up against the bottom step of her doorway and was lying there in the wet, small and yellow, and very still. He came out of the carriage first. He turned. He offered his hand. She took it and stepped down, and the green silk fell about her ankles with the same small, obedient sigh it had given on the steps of the manor 4 hours earlier, and the contact of his palm against hers was, for the second time that night, bare, and the bareness of it travelled the length of her arm before she had set her foot down on the curb. He walked her to the door. He did not speak. She did not speak. At the door, she turned. The lamp above the chemist's lit one side of his face, and the other was in shadow, exactly as the lamp on the south wall had lit it an hour before, and the symmetry of the lighting was so precise and so accidental that she almost laughed, and did not. "Granger! Draco! I owe you," he said, "a great deal more than 2,000 galleons. You owe me 2,000 galleons. That was the agreement." "The agreement? Was the agreement, Draco? Do not unmake it now. Do not. I beg you." He looked at her. He did not move. The hand that had been at his side lifted, very slowly, to the level of her shoulder, and stopped, and did not complete its motion. She watched it stop. She watched him watch it stop. She watched him lower it with the same control with which he had lowered his hand earlier from the curl at her temple, and let it rest, again, against the wool of his coat. He took her gloved hand instead. He lifted it. He bent his head. He laid his mouth, for the smallest, most private fraction of a second, against the back of her glove. A perfectly correct gesture, a gesture from a manual of behavior 2 centuries old, a gesture his great-grandfather might have used in a hall in 1880 to a witch he intended to court for 2 years. And he straightened, and he let her hand go. "Good night, Hermione." "Good night." He turned. He went down the 3 shallow steps. He climbed back into the carriage. The door closed. The wheels moved. The carriage and the horses and the small, competent charm work around them all faded by degrees into the wet dark of the Bloomsbury street, and were gone. Hermione stood on her doorstep for some time after that. She stood with the door key in her gloved hand and the small yellow leaf against the toe of her shoe. And she did not, for what felt like a very long moment, lift the key to the lock. She lifted her other hand instead. She looked, in the lamplight, at the back of the glove where his mouth had been. There was nothing there, of course. There was nothing to see. There was only the soft, slightly damp leather and the faintest possible warmth that was already fading, and the small, ridiculous fact that she was standing on a muggle pavement in a couture gown at 1 in the morning, looking at the back of her own hand. She drew breath. She turned the key. She went up the dark stairs to her flat. She did not turn on the light. The week that followed was, by every measure she could bring to bear on it, an ordinary week. She rose at 6. She wrote the cheque to the Foundation's healer on Monday morning, in the small, bright kitchen with her tea cooling at her elbow, and she sealed it, and she carried it to the office in Diagon Alley, and she watched the healer, a tall, soft-spoken witch in her 50s who had been working without pay since August, open the envelope and read the figure, and sit down quite suddenly on the corner of the desk and press the heels of both hands against her eyes for the length of 3 breaths before she could speak. "Hermione, don't. This, don't, Mary." She did not say where the money had come from. She had prepared on the carriage ride home from Wiltshire on Saturday night, and through the whole long sleepless Sunday that followed, a small, careful sentence about a private donor who was asked to remain anonymous, and the sentence served. Mary did not press her. Mary, who had spent the better part of 3 decades attending to the dignities of werewolves at the moment of their transformations, knew when not to press. On Tuesday, she attended a subcommittee meeting at the ministry. On Wednesday, she gave a small lecture at the Department of Magical Law Enforcement on the proposed amendments to the Inheritance Act of 1923. On Thursday, she had lunch with Ginny at a Muggle establishment in Soho and answered every question Ginny put to her about the Foundation, the legislation, the weather, and the small bruise of fatigue under her left eye that Ginny had noticed within the first 30 seconds of sitting down. She did not mention the dinner. She did not mention the dinner because Ginny had not asked about it, and Ginny had not asked about it because Ginny did not know there had been one. Nobody knew there had been one. The thing had occurred behind the walls of a private house on a Saturday evening in late October, and beyond the principals to it, 5 people, 2 footmen, a hostess, and a son. There was, in all the world, no one to whom she might describe it without producing a sentence so improbable it would have unmade the friendship that received it. She did not mention the dinner because she did not, herself, yet know what it had been. On Friday morning, the owl arrived. She had been at her desk in the Foundation's office. The owl was a small grey one, with the elegant, faintly tired demeanour of a bird that had been kept for correspondence rather than parcels, and it landed on the corner of her in-tray with the considered care of an animal that was accustomed to being received by the kind of witches who would offer it water. She offered it water. It accepted with a slight, dignified incline of the head, drank, and lifted 1 foot. The seal on the letter was pale and old, and bore the small impression of a single rose. "Miss Granger, I am aware, my dear, that you will receive this letter with a degree of trepidation, and I should like to begin by assuring you that the trepidation is, in this instance, unwarranted. I have been thinking since Saturday of our conversation in the Rose Garden, and of 1 or 2 matters which I should very much like to discuss with you in person and at my own table. I am asking, as a favour, and entirely without the participation or knowledge of my son, whether you might join me for tea on Monday at 4 o'clock. I have already taken the liberty of arranging that he will be detained at the ministry until at least 6. Yours, with great regard, Narcissa Black Malfoy." She read it once. She read it a second time. She sat back in her chair, in the small, bright office with the rain at the window and the Foundation's accounts open on the blotter, and she laughed, a small, low, faintly stunned laugh into the empty room. Narcissa Black Malfoy. Not, she noticed, Narcissa Malfoy. The signature had been formal and old, and chosen with the care of a witch who chose every word. The drawing room into which a footman led her on Monday afternoon was not the drawing room of Saturday. It was a smaller room on the south side of the house, with a fire that had been laid for 2 and a low table set with a tea service of such delicacy that the cups, lifted, made the small, high-singing sound of crystal rather than the duller note of china. There were no roses on the table. There was a single small bowl of late hellebores, white-faced with their petals tipped in green, and a plate of small pale biscuits, and nothing else. Narcissa rose to meet her. "Miss Granger, Mrs. Malfoy. Narcissa, please." "Hermione, then." A small, slow smile. Narcissa took her hand. She did not, this time, brush the air above the knuckles. She held the hand for the length of perhaps 2 breaths and let it go. "Sit, my dear. The tea is Darjeeling. There is also a tisane if you prefer. The biscuits are quite good. My cook, who is 70 and tyrannical, has been instructed to make them only when I am entertaining women whose conversation I anticipate enjoying. It is, you understand, a compliment. I am flattered. You may be. Sit." She sat. Narcissa poured. The tea came into the small singing cup in a long, pale stream, and Hermione, who had spent the better part of 3 days preparing for any number of opening salvos, found that the opening salvo, when it came, was not one she had prepared for at all. "My son," Narcissa said, "did not, of course, deceive me for one moment." A pause. A small, precise pause, into which she lifted her own cup and drank and set it down. "No. I had suspected the contrivance from the morning of the dinner. I confirmed it during the consommé. By the time of the salad, I had ceased to think of it as a contrivance at all." "I see." "You do see. I observed you seeing. It was, I confess, the most interesting 4 hours of dinner I have hosted in the past decade. A biscuit, Hermione. Please, they are not for show." She took a biscuit. The biscuit was, in fact, very good. Pale, almost shortbread, with a faint perfume of lemon thyme that suggested the cook had access to a herb garden of her own, and an opinion about it. She set the biscuit on the edge of her saucer. "Mrs. Malfoy. Narcissa. Narcissa, may I ask, without impertinence, what it is you wish to say to me?" The older woman looked at her. The look was not at all the look of Saturday evening. The watchful enigma had been put away, gently, like a piece of jewelry returned to its case, and what remained in its place was a face Hermione had not seen before, older, quieter, and considerably more tired than the face Narcissa Malfoy had presented across her own dinner table. "My son," Narcissa said, "is 24 years old. He has been, since the age of 11, in a state of more or less continuous instruction in how to be the kind of man who has had ancestors. He has been instructed to walk in a certain way, and to address his elders in a certain way, and to take a certain kind of woman in to dinner. He has been instructed, since he was 16, in a great many things which I shall not detail to you, my dear, because you were in many cases on the other side of them, and you do not need to hear me catalogue them from this chair. Mrs. Malfoy. Narcissa, please. Narcissa. There is, however, one thing in which he has not been instructed. He has not been instructed in how to want a thing for himself. I do not mean a possession. He has been instructed in possessions exhaustively. I mean a thing of the heart, a person. He does not know how. He has been raised by his father, by his tutors, in part I am bound to say by me, to wait for the appropriate object to be presented to him, and to recognize it when it is, and to behave correctly about it thereafter. He has done this faithfully for a very long time. He has done it through the war. He has done it through the trials. He has done it through 3 years in which he has known himself to be, by every measure that signifies, alone. Hermione did not speak. On Saturday evening, Narcissa said, I watched him sit at a table next to a woman whom I had not selected, whom no one had selected, whom he had, I gather, produced from a muggle pavement on roughly 4 days' notice, and I watched him become a man I have not seen since he was 9 years old. I watched him laugh at one of Daphne Greengrass's remarks. I watched him touch the back of your hand and not know that he had done it. I watched him, at the end of the salad, when you were speaking with Caroline Greengrass about the 3rd clause of the Inheritance Act, let his entire shoulder lean half an inch toward yours and rest there for the better part of 3 minutes without the slightest awareness. A pause. I am his mother, Hermione. I have been studying that profile since the day it was put into my arms. I know the difference. Hermione very quietly set down her teacup. What are you asking me, Narcissa? I am asking you nothing. I am telling you a thing. I am telling you because my son has spent his entire adult life under the impression that he is required to ask permission to want what he wants, and he is, at present, far too proud and far too frightened to ask it of you. I am informing you, my dear, that you have it. I have... what? My permission. For what it is worth, which is, I grant you, considerably less than it once would have been, and yet I find not nothing. A small, dry, almost embarrassed smile. I have spent 9 weeks producing daughters of important families for him to be polite to over tea. I would not, in good conscience, withhold from him the one witch in Britain at the sight of whom he has, in 3 years, forgotten to be polite. Hermione laughed. She did not mean to. The laugh came out of her with the same surprised brevity as Draco's in the cafe, and she pressed 2 fingers swiftly to the corner of her mouth to contain it, and Narcissa Black Malfoy, sitting on the other side of a tea service that cost more than the Foundation's entire November payroll, watched her laugh with an expression of quiet, considered relief. There is, however, Narcissa said, one matter. Yes, you must come to it yourself, both of you. I have, in informing you, done the only thing I am permitted by decency to do. I shall not write to him. I shall not raise it at dinner. I shall not, and you must believe me on this point, Hermione, interfere in any further way. He must come to your door. You must open it. Whatever passes between you on either side of that door is no longer mine. I understand. Drink your tea, my dear. It is getting cold. She drank her tea. When she rose to leave an hour later, Narcissa walked her to the front door herself. The footman had been dismissed. The hall was empty. At the threshold, Narcissa took her hand again, held it again for 2 breaths, and let it go. Thank you, Hermione said. Whatever for, my dear? For, she paused, for not making me ask. Narcissa Black Malfoy smiled. The smile this time was small and slow, and so unguarded that Hermione almost did not recognize the woman wearing it. Go home, Hermione, she said. It is going to rain. It did rain. It began before she had reached the end of the Manor's drive. A slow, heavy autumn rain that lay on the wet leaves of the lime trees, with the soft, persistent weight of a thing settling in for the night. By the time the apparition deposited her on the corner of her own street in Bloomsbury, the rain had thickened into the sort that London produced once or twice a year. Vertical, deliberate, the kind that struck the pavement and bounced an inch upward in small bright crowns before falling back into the standing water. She did not, walking home from the corner, hurry. She walked with her hands loose at her sides and her face lifted slightly toward the wet sky, and the rain came down across her cheekbones and into the loose curl at her temple, and she let it. She had spent the whole of the carriage ride from the manor, the carriage Narcissa had insisted upon, refusing to let her apparat from the manor steps in a couture autumn coat, running through with the small, precise discipline she brought to legal drafting every separate piece of what had been said in the south drawing-room. She had not, in the running through, come to a conclusion. She did not, she had realized somewhere along the wet road, require a conclusion. The conclusion was already inside her. It had been inside her, she suspected, since the moment in the colonnade when Draco had said, "You are not pretending," and she had failed, with every faculty at her disposal, to deny it. She climbed the 3 shallow steps to her doorway. She put the key in the lock. She did not turn it. She turned slowly on the step and looked back down the wet street. He was standing on the opposite pavement. He had been standing there, she understood at once, for some considerable time. His hair was dark with the rain, and his coat, the long dark one, was soaked through at the shoulders, and his hands, which were not gloved, were thrust into the pockets with the kind of forgotten cold that came of a man who had stopped registering the temperature an hour ago. He was looking at her. He had been looking at her, she suspected, since she had turned the corner. He did not, when she saw him, move. She did not, when she saw him, move either. The rain fell between them along the length of the empty street with the soft, continuous percussion of a sound that had been going on for so long it had become a kind of silence. A bus passed at the top of the road, its windows yellow and warm, and was gone. A cat, dark and ill-tempered, made its way along the railings of the chemist's with the particular fury of an animal that had not been admitted indoors quickly enough. The lamp above the chemist's flickered once and steadied. He crossed the street. He did not run. He walked in the slightly off-kilter stride she had first seen on a Muggle pavement 3 weeks ago, with the rain darkening his coat further at each step, and he came up the 3 shallow stairs and stopped on the step below hers, which placed his face approximately level with her own. "Granger, you are wet through." "Yes." "How long have you been standing there?" "Not long." "How long, Draco?" A pause. He looked at the railing. He looked back at her. 40 minutes. She closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, he was still there, and the rain was still falling, and a small dark drop had gathered at the end of one of those dark eyelashes she had had no business cataloguing on the way out to the manor, and was hanging there, and had not fallen. "Come in. Granger. Come in, Draco. We can have this conversation on a doorstep in the rain, or we can have it inside, where there is a fire, and where you are not in the process of contracting pneumonia. I do not, on balance, mind which, but the choice is presently yours. Come in." She turned the key. She opened the door. She did not look back to see whether he was following. She climbed the dark, narrow stairs to her flat, and she heard, behind her, after the length of 2 breaths, the small, wet sound of his boots on the lowest step, and then on the second, and then on the third. Inside the flat, she did not, at first, turn on the lamps. She crossed to the small fireplace in the sitting room and bent and laid the fire, kindling, paper, the small, steady flick of her wand at the base of it. And the flames came up in a slow, soft bloom that lit one wall and left the rest of the room in a warm amber half-dark. She did not turn round. She heard him close the door behind himself with the same kind of care he had used closing the carriage door 3 weeks earlier. She heard him stop on the small worn rug just inside the threshold. She heard him say nothing. She turned. He was standing exactly where she had heard him stop. The rain had begun to run down the long line of his coat and onto her floor in small dark patches, and he was holding himself with the precise straightness of a man who had not, in the 4 flights up, allowed himself to register that he was about to do something he did not know how to do. "Take off the coat. Granger, take it off, Draco. You can stand on my rug and ruin it, or you can take off the coat. Those are the present options." He took off the coat. His hands, she saw, were not steady. He hung the coat over the back of the chair by the door, where it began at once to drip in a slow, even rhythm onto the floorboards. He did not, in the same motion, look at her. She crossed the room. She stopped in front of him. She was perhaps a foot away, close enough to see the small dark gleam of rain still in his hair, close enough to see the precise place at the side of his throat where the wet collar had begun to stick to the skin, and she did not touch him. She looked at him. He looked at the floor. "Look at me." He looked at her. His face in the firelight was a face she had not properly seen before. It was not the polished face of the Wizengamot. It was not the wry face of the cafe. It was not even the unguarded face on the steps of the manor 3 Saturdays ago, when he had given her a winter rose and excused her from accepting it. It was a face from which everything had been taken away. The irony, the discipline, the long old habit of holding the mouth in a particular line, and what remained was very young and very tired and quite frightened. "Why are you here?" she said. "Granger, why are you here, Draco? Say the sentence. You came up from your own house in the rain, and you stood on a Bloomsbury pavement for 40 minutes. There is a sentence at the end of that. Say it." He drew breath. He did not speak at once. When he spoke, his voice was low and steady, and a great deal more honest than the voice she had heard from him at any previous point in 3 weeks, or indeed in the 7 years she had known him before that. "I came," he said, "because I have not slept since Saturday. I came because my mother has been smiling at her own teacup all week in a manner that I cannot bring myself to confront. I came because I sat at my desk at the ministry this afternoon and tried 4 times to draft the same memorandum and could not finish a single paragraph because I kept thinking about the white grandiflora. I came because Granger, because the dinner ended 4 days ago and the contract was satisfied and the money was paid, and I have no further pretext, none on which to come up your stairs, and I have come up them anyway because I cannot think of anything else to do." A pause. "That is the sentence." She looked at him. She did not, for a long moment, speak. The fire moved in the grate. The rain at the window moved. Somewhere downstairs a door opened and closed, the chemist locking up for the night. He did not look away, to his very considerable credit, and she noted it and stored the note, and did not then say anything about it. He did not look away. Draco. Hermione. I went to tea with your mother this afternoon. He did not move. He did not exactly blink. The line of his throat did one small considered thing above his collar and was still again. I see. She told me a great many things. She also told me she would not tell you that she had told them to me. I am, on the whole, sympathetic to that instruction. I do not intend to repeat the conversation to you. There is, however, one piece of it which I shall. All right. She told me, Hermione said, that you have been raised to wait for the appropriate object to be presented to you and to behave correctly about it. She told me you do not know how to want a thing for yourself. She told me, and I am paraphrasing Draco, although the paraphrase is, I think, accurate, that the moment in which she stopped believing the choreography on Saturday was the moment in which she watched you laugh at one of Daphne Greengrass's remarks without remembering to be polite about it. A breath. I would like you, she said, to tell me what you want, without rehearsing it, without waiting for me to indicate that the answer is acceptable. I am, for the avoidance of any possible doubt, telling you in advance that the answer is acceptable. I would like to hear you say it anyway. He did not speak. His mouth opened. His mouth closed. The hand at his side lifted, the way it had lifted on the doorstep 3 Saturdays ago, toward the curl at her temple, and this time it did not stop. It reached the side of her face. It rested there. The palm was cold from the rain, and his fingers, long, pale, faintly trembling against the warm skin of her cheek, settled against the line of her jaw with the careful precision of a man laying down a thing he had no right to be holding, and had been holding anyway in some interior pocket for some considerable time. You, he said, say it properly, Draco. You, Hermione, I want you. I have wanted you since the carriage on the way back from the manor. I have wanted you since the South Walk. I have wanted you possibly since the consommé. I am, at present, unable to identify a moment within the last 3 weeks at which I did not want you, and I am, on the evidence, prepared to commit to the proposition that the wanting predates the consommé by some considerable interval, although I am not yet ready to be cross-examined on the exact figure. She laughed. She did not mean to. She laughed into his palm, small, breathless, a laugh that was half a sob and entirely a yes. And she lifted her own hand and laid it over the back of his, and she turned her face, the smallest possible quarter of an inch, into the cold, wet skin of his hand at her cheek. He kissed her. He kissed her with the small, careful slowness of a man who had been told in advance that the answer was acceptable and had still not entirely believed it. And then, when she kissed him back with the considerable lack of small, careful slowness of a man whose disbelief had, in the space of one breath, given way, the rain went on at the window. The fire went on in the grate. Somewhere, in a south drawing-room miles away, in a house with a famous rose garden, a woman in a pale grey gown was sitting with a single small lamp lit at her elbow and the rest of the room in shadow, and she was, at exactly that moment, smiling into her own cup of tea. In the morning, The rain had stopped. The light that came in at the kitchen window was the soft, particular grey of London after a storm, the kind that lit a room without committing to it, that made every surface look slightly washed and very still. She made tea. He sat at her table in a shirt she had located after some searching from the bottom of a drawer she had not opened in 3 years. It had belonged to her father and was a size too large in the shoulders, and he wore it with the unself-consciousness of a man who had not, in his life, worn a borrowed shirt before, and was prepared to discover that he did not mind. His coat was over the back of her chair. His boots were by the door. He did not say anything for some time. Neither did she. They drank their tea. He watched her over the rim of his cup. She watched him over the rim of hers. At some point, he reached his hand across the table. She put hers into it. "Granger. Draco? Will you come to dinner at the manor on Saturday? Will your mother be present?" "My mother will be present." "Will there be a green grass?" "There will not be a green grass." "Then yes." He smiled. It was a small, slow, almost startled smile, as though the smile had occurred to him rather than the other way around. And she watched it arrive on his face with the quiet satisfaction of a witch who had been waiting for some weeks now to see the smile properly land. The kettle on the hob behind them began very gently to sing. 3 years later. The rose garden at Malfoy Manor was, in late May, at the precise small interval of the year when it was at its most insufferably proud of itself. The hedges had been clipped. The gravel walks had been raked. The white grandiflora at the southwest corner, the one bred by a great-great-grandmother in 1887, of which there were 3 in the world and 2 in this garden, had opened its second bloom of the season at some point during the previous night, and was holding the bloom up to the morning light with the small, unembarrassed vanity of a flower that knew exactly what it was. Hermione was sitting on the low marble bench at the end of the south walk. She was wearing a dress of pale linen the colour of weak tea, with the sleeves pushed up to the elbow, and a small straw hat that had been pressed upon her at the door by her mother-in-law, on the grounds that the May sun was not to be trusted. The hat was not, in any strict sense, necessary. The sun was kind. The hat had been a gesture of affection, and she had accepted it as such, and she had put it on the bench beside her after a courteous 15 minutes, and was now ignoring it with the same unembarrassed serenity as the grandiflora. In her lap was a small folio of the Foundation's accounts. The accounts were no longer perpetually 3 months from insolvency. They had not been 3 months from insolvency in some time. The healer who had once refused her wages had taken on 2 assistants. The clerk who had been owed back pay was now married and was owed nothing, and had taken to bringing in vegetables from her allotment on Wednesdays. The Foundation operated as of the most recent quarter in 5 counties. The 5 counties were the result of a great deal of legislative work and of a great deal of fundraising, and of 1 or 2 specifically anonymous donations of a size which Hermione had stopped at some point in the 2nd year, attempting to query the provenance of. Her quill moved. She drew a small line under the figure for April. She wrote in the figure for May. The figure for May was higher than the figure for April. She closed the folio. A shadow fell across the bench. She did not look up at once. You are not working in the rose garden, Granger. I am precisely working in the rose garden, Draco. You are sitting on my great-grandmother's bench with the accounts open on your lap. You are working at the rose garden. That is a quibble. It is my quibble. I will defend it. She looked up at him. He was standing on the gravel walk with the May sun in his hair and the sleeves of his shirt rolled up, exactly as her own were, to the elbow. He had been in the south orchard with his mother for the better part of the morning, on some errand to do with grafting that Hermione had elected not to be educated about. His left hand had a smear of dark earth across the back of it. There was, more improbably, a small green leaf caught in his hair above his ear, and he did not, evidently, know it was there. She did not, at once, point this out to him. "Where is your mother?" she said instead. "In the morning room. She is composing, at some length, a letter to Lady Greengrass. Daphne has become engaged." "Has she?" "To a muggle-born wizard from the Department of Mysteries. My mother is, and I quote, delighted, my darling, and rather entertained. Lady Greengrass is being more difficult about it. My mother is writing to settle her." "Your mother is a menace." "My mother is a menace." He sat down on the bench beside her. The bench was narrow. His thigh, in the worn old breeches he wore for garden work, came against the side of hers through the linen of her dress and stayed there. She did not move. Neither did he. The leaf was still in his hair. "Hold still," she said. "I am holding still." She lifted her hand. She drew the leaf out of his hair with the small, careful precision of a witch, performing an exacting transfiguration, and she held it up for him to see, and he looked at the leaf with the mild astonishment of a man encountering a thing in an entirely unexpected location. "Where did that come from?" "The south orchard, one assumes." "How long has it been there?" 3 hours, possibly 4. "Granger, I noticed it when you came down the walk. You let me sit down on my great-grandmother's bench with a leaf in my hair." "I let you sit down on my great-grandmother-in-law's bench with a leaf in your hair. There is a distinction. I have married into the bench, Draco. I have rights." He laughed. It was the laugh she had first heard in the cafe in Bloomsbury 3 years ago. Short, low, real, and which, over the course of 3 years, she had come to hear with an increasing frequency she did not, even now, entirely take for granted. She let the leaf fall onto the gravel. She did not look at it again. He took her hand. He did it without ceremony, in the unstudied, slightly absent manner of a man who had been taking her hand at intervals for 3 years, and had begun, in the 2nd year, to forget that he was doing it. The small gold band on her 4th finger pressed, briefly, against the inside of his palm. The small gold band on his own caught the May sun and gave back, for the length of 1 quiet second, a thread of pale fire. "Mother wants to know," he said, "whether we are staying for dinner." "What is your mother making for dinner?" "My mother is not, on the whole, making the dinner. My mother is supervising the cook, who has, as you know, opinions. There is to be a fish." "There is generally a fish." "There is to be the fish that my mother believes you to be partial to." "I am partial to the fish." "Then we are staying for dinner." "We are staying for dinner." A pause. A long, comfortable pause, of the kind that had become, over 3 years, the structural element of all their longer conversations. A bee, fat, unhurried, the sort of bee that had been hired by the management, made its way along the lavender at the foot of the bench and was gone. The white grandiflora at the southwest corner stirred faintly in a breath of warm air. Somewhere beyond the south wall, a door opened, and a voice called something cheerful and indistinct, and was answered and closed. "Granger!" "Draco, are you happy?" She looked at him. It was not a question he had asked her often. He had asked it the first time on the morning after the storm 3 years ago, sitting at her kitchen table in her father's borrowed shirt, with the kettle beginning to sing on the hob. He had asked it once or twice in the year of the wedding, in the rather stiff cadence of a man performing a check on a piece of machinery he was not entirely confident had been correctly installed. He had asked it on the morning she had come home from the ministry to tell him that the Second Amendment to the Werewolf Act had passed by a margin of 43. He had asked it, most recently, on a Sunday morning 7 months ago, very quietly, with his hand laid lightly on the small rounding of her stomach beneath the bedsheet. She had answered yes each time. She answered yes again now. She did not, however, answer with a word. She lifted his hand, the one she was already holding, and she turned it so that the back of it lay in her own palm, and the smear of dark earth across his knuckles caught the May light. She bent her head. She laid her mouth against the smear of earth briefly, with the same small private precision he had used 3 years ago on her gloved.
So that was their story. A boy who did not know how to want things, a girl who did not how to be wanted, and one dinner that changed everything. I love this story. I love it because nothing big happens. There is no battle, no spell, no villain at the door. There is only table, a dress, a garden in the rain, and two people learning very slowly how to look at each other. I think we forget sometimes how quiet love can be. We think it has to be loud, we think it has to be sudden, but often it is small. It is a hand on a back, a leaf in the rain, a cup of tea on a Monday morning. Draco did not save Hermione. Hermione did not save Draco. They just sat next to each other at a table, and after 4 hours, neither of them wanted to get up. That is the secret, I think. Love is not the storm. Love is the chair you stay in after the storm is gone. Thank you for being here with me. Thank you for listening. If this story warmed you even a little, please stay. There are more stories coming, more dinners, more gardens, more slow, quiet hands finding each other in the dark. Until then, be soft with yourself, be soft with the people you love, and remember the best things in life do not arrive shouting. They knock once, quietly,